here tonight to hear from Michelle and about our audit from Lindsey and Associates. We welcome everyone. Let's get started.
Mr. President, Mayor Mo, as required by state law and the city charter, we had an independent audit conducted for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2014. It was conducted by Lindsey and Associates, and Mr. Bob Diss is here to go through the documents with you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As Michelle's pointed out, my name is Bob Diss with Lindsey and Associates, and as she's pointed out, we have completed the audit actually back in November of the city's financial statements as of June 30th, 2014, which you probably got in front of you and you probably all read, but I'm going to go through it and hit a few highlights. We're going to go through it. You can ask questions as we go along or wait till the end, either way. Page 1 is our audit opinion letter. As always, goes for, I think it's 3 pages. And it gives, states that we give the city a clean opinion, also now known as an unmodified opinion, meaning we give reasonable assurance that the statements are not materially misstated. That's all those 3 pages are saying. And as you can see on page 3, it's dated November 20th. It was delayed for about 3 weeks because we were waiting for information from the actuaries. We tried to hurry them along, but you know, actuaries have a mind of their own, unfortunately. After that begins management's discussion and analysis. That goes on through page 12, and that's not written by us, that's written by city's management, Michelle, and it contains certain things that, you know, are required to point out, and it talks primarily about 2014, but also in comparison with 2013, and giving some reasons for why did certain things change. The actual financial statements begin then on page 13. And there's, it's important to know there's 2 sets of financial statements. They're on 2 different bases of accounting. The first set, if you have the balance sheet on page 13, is called the government-wide statement. It's on the full accrual base of accounting. It takes everything of the city into account: the fixed assets, long-term debt, depreciation, expense, all of that. And of course you have assets on top, liabilities, and equity down at the bottom. The related income statement for that is there on page 14, and it a little odd. It starts here with the expenses here. It goes across by program with the revenue, and then general revenues down here. And on that base of accounting, the city's net position increased by almost $4 million last year. Now the next set of financial statements is page 15 and 16, and that's on a different base of accounting. It only takes into account current assets and current liabilities. There's no fixed assets, no long-term debt, nothing like that. And it also is broken out by fund. You've got several funds going across there. Of course, your assets and liability on top, liabilities down at the bottom. And the differences between the 2 balance sheets is shown over on the right, and that's always going to be things like fixed assets and long-term debt. The related income statement is then on page 16, broken out by the different funds, and that's only current revenues, as in ones that were received within, 60 days after year end. And then the differences between the 2 income statements is shown over to the right, and that's going to be your long-term items. There's also a statement of fiduciary net position there. They're on pages 17 and 18. These are not the funds of the city. They actually belong to the employees, but the city has a fiduciary responsibility to invest them with somebody who won't steal them. The notes to the statements begin then on page 19. A lot of it is boilerplate, same as last year, so if you read it last year, you'll notice most of it's exactly the same as last year. Note 1 always talks about significant accounting policies, and that goes on for several pages. There are not very many highlights there. We probably in there talk about the new statement we implemented, GASB 67. For next year, we're going to implement GASB 68, which you may have heard about. One person's already shaking his head. Actually, it's about a half dozen people up in Connecticut. Yeah, I would fire half of them if I could. But, yeah, there's a new GASB 68 coming out, and that is going to put possibly a large number, your actuaries are gonna tell us what number to put then on page 13 there. On your balance sheet, there could be some, if you have an unfunded liability in your pension plan, because you have your own pension plan, then that's gonna show up there on page 13. But that's coming up, that'll show up next year, meaning in about 6 months. So other notes of interest, like on note 3, starting on page 29, we talk about the different investments the city has. We outline what those investments are. They're on page 32, MLGIP, money market, CDs, that sort of thing. Total investments, exclusive of the agency funds, about 17 million. They're at June 30th. Next page, we talk about notes receivable and taxes receivable. We got the 2 notes from the fire department and the rescue squad. Note 10 on page 36 talks about your capital assets and depreciation expense by type and then also by department. Long-term debt is, we go into detail, long-term debt, they're on note 11, page 37, and on page 38 is a summary of the different long-term debts, and by year that you have to pay back principal and interest, they're on page 39. Management deferred compensation. We start talking about the pension plan. They're on page 41, and is it 2 pension plans? Yeah, 2 separate pension plans. And I suppose next year that note's going to change quite a bit as well. And a lot of that is provided by the actuary again, so hopefully we can get the actuary on time this year. Other post-employment benefits, risk uncertainty. Let me see. And we'll also mention then in required supplementary information back on page 55, we're required to show the original budget and final budget and the variance from the actual, therefore revenues and expenditures by broad category. We go into greater detail, almost line by line, not quite, starting on page 56, all the way to the back. And that's the end of that. We've also issued a couple of other letters. One's called a SAS 114 letter, and that's just certain communications we're required to give management that we had no difficulties other than waiting for the actuaries to complete the audit. We didn't find any fraud. We had no disagreements with management, that sort of thing. Scope of the audit didn't change as a result of anything we found. And also we've got well, not a SAS 114 letter, but a government, the internal control letter in which we didn't come across any weaknesses in your internal controls.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Michelle, any comments? No. Okay. Any questions from the council? Ms. Query? Mr. Les?
We're gonna get a hard copy of this, Mr. President?
I'm sure we will.
Okay. Let me just ask questions. 68 includes the issues, if we have any leases, is that correct, if I remember correctly? There's some changes dealing with leases in municipalities.
Leases, 68
Yes.
is your pension.
Hard copy.
Is only pension?
Pension, I don't think leases.
I think I said something to Michelle about, oh, man. Yeah,
Never saw it.
I said something to Michelle about, there's a GASB coming out that if you're a leasee or a leaseor, there's some changes that are gonna be reflected. I think I sent it to you a couple days ago. Sent it to Mike Green too. Okay, but again, has to do with, it's specifically with leases. I don't know how they're accounted for.
68 is called Accounting and Financial Reporting for Pensions.
Okay, that's all that's in 68.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah, and then 69, Disposal of Government Operations, 71, Pension Transition for Contributions made subsequent to this.
All right, well, I said something to Michelle, maybe she can respond back to me. Something came out, that came across my desk. Okay?
Okay. Not anything immediately. I
No,
mean, I'm sure. they'll come up
everything's in
with
the future.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, if you have questions anytime throughout the year, our number is at the top of page 1.
All right, Nicholas, anything?
Not at this time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Excuse me. Could you go into a little bit more detail on 68 and what it will do to the city in the future, if anything, or your professional opinion?
It's, the only thing it's gonna change is really the printouts here. It's not gonna affect any kind of funding requirements or anything like that. It merely says, you now have to show this unfunded liability. That's all it does.
Does it show as debt, though, for us, or as
It'll
a?
show up as a liability on your full accrual basis, on the government-wide statements, the first set.
I had thought that we had talked earlier, or about a month ago, that 68, we were gonna be required to have that fund, be able to show where that liability, where we pay for it from. So you'd have to have.
In a note, in disclosure, there's gonna be some new disclosures in the back, but you don't have to do anything differently.
No, I guess, an example would be if we have $1 million liability under this new 68, was my understanding that we had to have that $1 million someplace to be able to.
My understanding, no, it's only reporting. You're not, the funding requirements
Do
don't
you remember,
change.
was I thinking of something different? Do you all remember? It's been a month. Could you find out a little bit more, make sure
Yeah,
we're,
I'm actually attending a class on it this Friday,
okay.
and I'll,
It was, I thought that we were required to show where that liability would be paid from,
But-
was my understanding of it.
Mayor, if I could,
Mhm.
we've discussed this before. I think what it does is you have to lay it out how it's gonna be paid for in the future, if I remember correctly.
what your current plan is.
What is your current plan to
There's
pay it
certain
back?
extra disclosures you have to.
Yes.
To put in the back, but it doesn't require you to do anything different, just disclose what you're doing.
Michelle, if you would make sure we follow up after he attends his class and then make sure I may be thinking of something different, but I thought somewhere along the line we were required to have the money, whatever that liability was, we were required to have that money with that funding available. So I may be,
Your net position, yes, you will. Because it would just suddenly be a large liability
right.
that will decrease your net position.
Okay, anything else, Mayor?
No, I just wanted, on page 8, when we talk about the funds and retirement plans for the city, I just want to note the amount of contribution that the mayor and council have provided to the pension fund, and more importantly, even put extra funding in there. So I think that's something that, the general public and the employees should be very, should know about, because again, we've made that commitment. And I always say Mike Les was the one years ago that always got me in saying, put more money into it. So we've always tried to do that. And I think council should be commended for that, especially read something tonight where the courts ruled on Governor of New Jersey requiring him to make sure that he paid the billion some dollars that they required. They were holding back payments, and apparently courts ruled in the union's favor. So I thought that was an interesting article I was reading tonight. So, okay, great. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you, Michelle. We'll take a brief recess for the regular meeting.